We are now in the middle of January, and you must be wondering why I'm standing among all these trees. Fortunately, in the UK or in southern England where we live, we don't have a very harsh winter. Today, for instance, the temperature is 12 degrees centigrade, which is very mild. We've had a very mild winter so far, but very wet. So, although we are in the middle of winter and not being too cold, I'm going to start repotting. We have thousands of trees on the nursery. This is just one small area. There are thousands of trees, and although we don't repot each and every tree, each year we must repot about 500 trees or more. So there's a very big program of repotting, and it all has to be done before the end of March, and certainly with the deciduous trees before they start coming into leaf. Evergreens I start a bit early, so I'm going to start doing it early. Now, in case it confuses you, let me tell you straight away that the best time to repot is from the middle of February, certainly in the south of England, or if you have a mild temperate climate like we have in southern England. We start from mid-February until the end of March. I'm starting in the middle of January because we have all these greenhouses, and our greenhouses don't freeze. They go down to possibly 5 degrees, or on very cold nights to 0 degrees, but it doesn't go to -7, -10. And because I have the greenhouse protection, I'm able to do my repotting earlier. So that is the exception to the rule, because I have the greenhouse facilities. So if you have a greenhouse where you can protect the trees, I don't mean heating the greenhouse, but just protect it from frost, that is fine. So what am I going to show you today in this video? Let's have a look at these 4 trees here. These are 4 Itiogawa junipers. Very nice Itiogawa junipers. Look at all of them here. These are all the Itiogawa junipers that require repotting. They're still in these Japanese training pots. They're very nice for training, but to make them more saleable, I'm going to put them into better pots. I've chosen some pots, and let me just take one of the trees into the greenhouse to see how I go about doing the process. So follow me and I will take you in there. Those of you who've been to Herons will know that we have a lot of pots. We have hundreds, if not thousands of pots. And if you look around, this is just some of the pots in the display area. We have a couple of barns full of pots which we have not displayed. So we have pots from China, Korea, Taiwan, Japan, of course, and of course very high quality British pots. So with such a wide range of pots, where do you begin choosing a pot? I always tell you that the first thing to choose is, of course, the size of the pot. The size of the pot may seem obvious, but sometimes it is worth explaining. For a tree like this, I'm not going to use a pot like that because certainly it won't go in. That pot is possible, but a bit small. Mind you, I have my own opinions about pots. If you look at some of the pictures of the Japanese exhibition trees, I personally feel that they are in too small a pot, but that is just style. That is just a matter of style. But if you put it in too small a pot, it will stress the tree. So the size, meaning you got to be sensible. Now let's look at this tree. As I said, even that pot will be too small. Now what about putting it in a pot like that? Now that is far too big. If you were going to grow it on to make the tree stronger, you can use that pot if you've got nothing else, but that is far too big. I'm trying to put them in pots so that they become more saleable. That's the main reason. It doesn't need repotting because the tree is not pot bound. The roots haven't jammed in the pot. And then there is, of course, the style of the pot. This is what we call a semi-cascade style of pot. And some people may put it in that, but I feel the semi-cascade pot is really for semi-cascade tree. So this won't do. And what about shape? You've got round pots, you've got oval pots, and then you've got rectangular pots. This was already in a round training pot, so you could consider putting it back in a round pot, which doesn't really do it justice because the whole object is to make it go in a different type of pot. See, that would fit, but I don't think it's quite right. Before I go too far, let me talk about the color. You wouldn't think that talking about the pots can take so long. I could spend hours talking about pots. I've talked about the size first. Let me talk about the color. Now these are what we call unglazed pots. This is sort of a light brown color, this is a dark brown color. This is a glazed pot, but it's a dark color. Now by tradition, bonsai has a very long tradition because the Chinese have been growing bonsai for certainly 1500 to 2000 years. The Japanese have been growing bonsai for about 1000 years. And the Oriental tradition says that evergreen trees like this are better planted in unglazed pots because the serene look of the green is complemented by these dark unglazed pots. If you put it in a bright colored pot, for instance like this green pot, it is too gaudy. It clashes with the foliage of the tree. So glazed pots are normally left or kept for flowering trees, trees that have bright foliage like red leaves or pink flowers, white flowers. So the glazed pots are normally kept for colorful trees and deciduous trees. They're seldom used for evergreen trees. But having said that, you know what I am? I am not a great stickler for rules. If you like a pot, and if it's for your own enjoyment, you like a glazed pot, use it by all means. Please don't be bothered about what other people say and think about it. It is your tree and it's for your enjoyment, so do what you like. But I'm just telling you what the conventional wisdom is. So I've said about the size, I've said something about the color, and I haven't really touched upon the shapes of the things. So these are what we call the semi-cascade pots. Let me go somewhere else if you follow me. There are what we call proper cascade pots, which are deep. Like this one, this is a tall cascade pot. But this tree doesn't lend itself to being in a cascade pot because cascade pots are for trees that hang down. But this is going up, the cascade pot doesn't really suit. There's another cascade pot there. So, and then oval pot, you can have shallow ovals and you can have deep ovals. And then you can also have these pots which are called slabs like that. You know, if you mount it up, you can find a big slab and mount it up. So sometimes you don't have to use what we call the conventional types of pot. Let me just bring a very shallow pot to show you how the tree would look. Now these are conventional oval pots, but it's not really that shallow. So let me take it to the tree again and show you how the tree would look against one of these shallow pots. This is a Japanese tokoname unglazed pot. So let's put it here. If we come to the camera here, look full frontal here. That looks quite nice like that. And although it's oval, they get all sorts of variations. You can have a band in the middle, you can have a lip, you can have no lips. And if we just scan around those tokoname pots, let me come close with the camera and have a close look at all the tokoname pots. What you're seeing is what a customer would see when he comes to Herons. They look at this pot shop and they get completely bewildered by the shapes and the sizes. So these are shallow oval pots. Shallow oval pots are normally kept for forest and group plantings. You can also use shallow rectangular pots for group plantings, although they wouldn't look as nice. This is also an oval pot, not too shallow. That could be used for ordinary trees. These rectangular pots can be used for ordinary trees. So you see the variety there is. These are more conventional rectangular pots. These are unglazed pots. Now these grey pots, we call them silver fox. That means it's a rough, matte, silver, dull grey glaze. And this is, I think, very special type of glazing that is done in Tokoname region. I'm not sure whether it's a clay or it's a glaze. I believe it is a glaze, but it's very, very sophisticated. So you get those, so you get the ordinary brown unglazed, and even in the brown there are so many shades of color. And look at some of these pots. These are really for group plantings. And this is a huge pot, about 3-4 foot long. That's a Japanese pot, very ancient Japanese pot. So you can see the wide variety of pots. So if you have these oval pots, a tree like this could easily fit into one of these oval pots. So let's try it. I always say that when you go to choose a pot, it's like buying clothes or buying shoes. You got to try the tree with the pot. This is not the preferred color. I'm just showing you the size and the shape. So oval pots of this depth could also be suitable, but preferably go for an unglazed pot in the case of juniper. I would just mention that there's nothing to beat the Japanese pots, especially the Tokoname pots. Ever since we started importing from Japan back in the early 80s, we've always used Tokoname pots. That's where we used to go and shop. So I've said something about the size of pot, the shapes of pots, the color of pots. What else can I say? There are, of course, let's go now from the Tokoname pots to some of the Chinese pots. These are Chinese pots. I don't have to tell you that most of the products in the world, any consumer product, is almost invariably made in China. And bonsai pots are no different. You get such a wide variety of pots. And of course, the traditional Chinese pots, the ones that are used in top exhibitions, are antique pots which are 200, 300, 400 years old from China, and they're highly sought after. These are modern pots. And what you pay is what you get. The more you pay, the quality is better. The best Chinese pots come from Yixing. That's the area of China near Shanghai and Suzhou, where they make the famous teapots with the red clay, this color glaze. But they also have this very dark clay, which they call purple clay, and you get this distinctive dark color clay, and they are also very good for bonsai pots. Now Chinese pots, especially the decorated ones, are not to everyone's taste. Look at this beautiful pot. This is really a beautiful pot. Let me put the tree down and show you the pot. This is in gold letters. I don't know what it says because unfortunately I can't read Chinese, but it is such a beautiful pot. Look at the detail on this. Absolutely beautiful. And if you have the right tree, it would suit it very, very well. So there are so many types of these tall cascade pots. But if you have the right tree, the right Chinese style tree, it would suit. But because most people in the West are still producing trees after the Japanese style, they prefer the Japanese style pots. And look at these, I don't want to lift them, look at these decorated pots. I have lots of customers who absolutely rave about them because they're beautiful, but it may not suit a Japanese style tree. So you can see the wide variety and selection of pots we have. If you just home in closely on the detail, please, Merit, you can see the detail of these. And if you can come close to it, some of them have a very fine crackle glaze. Look at this for a glaze. fine cracker glaze on a emerald green pot. And so it goes. So these again are the Yixing pots. And of course, if you're having trees for training, we have plastic pots. These are large plastic bonsai pots. They're made either in Japan or in China or Taiwan. We get them in that shape, we get them in this shape. These are all plastic pots. They cost a fraction of the ceramic pots, obviously. And then of course there are the mica pots. I don't know why they call it a mica pot, M-I-C-A. Mica, as you know, is a mineral that is used for insulation. I know in a lot of the electrical products they still use mica, but they are virtually unbreakable. You can throw the pot on the ground and it will not break. They're so resilient and they're very, very dense. I think it's a type of polypropylene plastic, but it lasts forever. I've had mica pots that have lasted over 30 years since they first started making mica pots. So there you go. And then of course you can use ordinary pieces of slate or stone to plant the trees. So having said something about pots, I could go on and on, but I think that is sufficient for your needs. Size of pot, shape of pot, color of pot. These are the three main things. While we're talking of shape of pot and size of pot, I should also mention the depth. I've touched on it very briefly. There is a general belief or tradition that the deeper the pot, the thicker the trunk of the tree. So the shallow pots or you try and match the depth of the pot with the thickness of the trunk, but it doesn't always work like that. But as a general rule, the thicker the trunk, the deeper the pot can be. So that is about the depth of the pot. So let's now stop filming the pots and we are going to show you how I'm going to proceed with choosing pots for those 4 junipers. So I'm going to show you what pots I'm choosing for these 4 trees. So this first one, as I said, it's not fully pot bound, but I'm going to put them into these pots so that they become more saleable. So the first one I've chosen is this mica pot. This is a rectangular pot, and this is what we call a soft rounded edge with a rim. So that gives quite a lot of character to the pot. And I know that this size does fit the tree. So we're going to use this pot for this tree. I will show you when we pot that up. So that size is appropriate. I would say the size of the pot is about 70 or 80% of the total height of the tree. So that, as a general rule, is okay. When it comes to the depth, that trunk is fairly thick, but this pot could take a thicker trunk. But because I can't always find the ideal one, this one, proportion-wise, is quite okay. And I'll talk more about the positioning in the pot when we come to doing the planting. Okay, let's look at the next one. This is also quite an interesting juniper. And because it leans, let's see what pot it can take. This is another rectangular with soft rounded edges, but it's got a band in the middle. So this is slightly different from the other pot. So let's try this one. So this one could go like that, leaning that way. While we're talking of pots, this is a very beautiful juniper, as you can see, and this I put in a drum pot. So that reminds me that I can also use a drum pot. So for this tree, I'm going to use this pot. I know it is a bit too big for it, but it'll give it a chance to grow. I could go for a slightly smaller one, but I don't want to stress the tree. So that pot would fit that tree. And finally, the last one. This is yet another different pot. No, I think it's the same design as this, but it's slightly gray color. This is also a mica pot. So these are all budget mica pots. And in terms of price, these are like 20-25 pounds each. Similar ceramic pot from China would be about 50 to 60 pounds. The Japanese pots could be double that. So this one, I think we could use this pot like that. So I'm going to show you how we pot all these 4 trees up. So the next step will be to take you into the potting area and show you how this is done. Here we have this tree, and it's been planted, I would say, about possibly 3 years ago, and the soil I can make out is like a very fine akadama that has been used. As I mentioned earlier, it's by no means pot bound. Although roots have come to the edge of the pot, it is not what we would call a pot bound tree. If it was pot bound, it would be so congested you couldn't even get the rake in. There's a bit of mesh with the training pot. So that is the state of the roots. And what we do now, this is the part that frightens most people: teasing the roots. Now there are different tools for teasing the roots. This is what we call a rake. When I used to be in the club scene back in the 70s and 80s, people in Britain used to use their household dinner forks. They used to bend the dinner fork and make a rake with that. But I can tell you it doesn't work. These tools are made specifically for the repotting. So this is a traditional type of rake. You can get it with a tweezer as well. But these rakes are very efficient. So this is what you do with this rake. This design of rake will do most jobs. But if you're dealing with big trees and heavy trees, we find that the root rake with the wooden handles, either with a single pokey twine, what we call, or two tines, or triple hook, they would work. I prefer to use this because it's more heavy duty, but this also is quite efficient. I usually begin by teasing the surface to see if I can discover more surface roots or nebari to make it look more impressive and to give the feeling of the tree gripping the ground, gripping the soil. So begin by doing that. Never try and repot if you have frozen conditions. You can never pot a tree when the root ball is frozen solid. You need to thaw it out. So as I say, throughout the last 2 weeks, we've had temperatures in the teens, 12, 13, 15. It even went to 17 a couple of weeks ago. So we've had very mild weather. And as I keep pointing out, we have the benefit of the greenhouse. So the temperature in the greenhouse is about 15 degrees centigrade. And the outside temperature is 12 degrees today. So you can see I'm beginning by teasing the surface of the roots. What I try not to do, or I've never done in my life, is to jet all the soil off with water. There are some people who believe that they should jet all the soil off with a hose pipe and just bare root the tree. It's just that I think that it is a dangerous practice to do. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it is dangerous. I prefer not to jet all the soil off. Why do we repot? Repotting is done so that you can enable the roots to grow more freely, create a more vigorous tree. Many people who are new to bonsai think that, bonsai is the thing where you keep cutting the roots. And they think that cutting the roots is an integral part of bonsai. I know it's an important part of bonsai, but not the main purpose of bonsai. We cut the roots or repot the tree. I prefer to use the term repot rather than just cutting the roots, because we want the tree to grow strong. If you let the tree get pot bound, the congestion of the roots will stultify or reduce the vigor of the tree. And that is the reason for repotting. Many people don't understand this, especially beginners. I'm loosening the soil. Sometimes in the middle of the root ball, as I said, this tree has been probably potted up about 3 years ago, so it's not pot bound. But if the tree has been in the same pot for tens of years, 10 or 20 years, then you may need to go deeper into the soil to remove all the old soil and let air into the soil. Many people don't realize, especially if you're not a botanically minded person, you don't realize that roots actually breathe air. Just like we breathe air to keep ourselves alive, trees also need to breathe air through the roots, not just through the leaves, but through the roots. I don't know how it's done, but believe you me, they do that. It's like teasing your own hair out. I'm not talking about my hair, because I've lost a lot of hair. But you see, it's like combing the hair. And this is really like a small comb, isn't it? So we've loosened the root stem. See how nice and loose it is. And I know that in the center, it's certainly nice and loose and not too congested. How about cutting the roots? Now for cutting the roots, there are special tools. You can either use your secateurs, but these long handle scissors, we prefer to call them root cutting scissors. Try not to use the same scissor that you cut the twigs with to cut the roots, because you will blunt the twig cutting scissors by constantly cutting roots. Anything that has soil in it blunts the cutting surface very readily. So keep a separate pair just for cutting roots. Now when you come to repotting, it's always a good time to sort out these complicated roots. You see, this crossing root here is not good because it doesn't promote the radial look of the roots. So at this stage, it may be a good idea to try and get rid of that. So all this talk about nebari, some people make a song and dance and make all this nebari business so complicated, but nebari simply means creating a good radial root system. See, if you get rid of the crossing roots, then it looks more natural. You see now you've got radial roots going there. Although it was at the side, you don't see it, but you certainly don't want too many crisscrossing roots. And although there are no visible radial roots here, you want to encourage some radial roots coming this way. So this tree has still got a long journey to go. This is clearly the front of the tree, and that's the back of the tree. As you can see, it's got some beautiful shari or driftwood here. Now, I chose this drum pot because the style is right, and the size, although slightly big, is not bad. It'll give the chance to grow. It'll help the trunk to thicken much more. If the person who buys it doesn't like it, they can choose their own pot. So that's how we proceed. Now, how do we prepare the pot? It's not just a question of putting the tree in a pot and ramming it with soil. There's a lot more to potting a bonsai than you think. Because we have large drainage holes, the large drainage holes are there for a purpose. The drainage of the tree is very important for bonsai. If the soil is waterlogged and the roots cannot breathe air, and you have a waterlogged pot with no drainage, the roots will rot and die. So all pots, including bonsai pots, have ample drainage. You see such large holes. But if you put soil in there, all the soil will fall out. So to stop the soil falling out, we put mesh. There are various types of mesh. This is a purpose-made bonsai mesh. And this is just ordinary plastic mesh. People use it for insect proofing their houses or whatever. For the last 35 or 38 years, I've always used this ordinary garden mesh. And in fact, when we were very poor in my amateur days, I used to go to the street markets and buy the vegetable bags, you know, the onion bags and the carrot bags, orange plastic. I used to use that to put at the bottom. So you can always make do with something cheap and simple. So you can use this. So you can cut enough to cover each hole, like so. Have 4 separate pieces to cover it. Or if you feel lazy, I know again people will criticize me for that, You can cut a whole piece to cover the entire bottom, whatever you like. As I always say, there is no right and no wrong way. As long as it works for you, that is all that matters. So I'm a great believer in doing these things. After all, you don't see what is underneath the pot. As long as it works, that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to use this large hole mesh because this is what I now prefer to use. Reminds me of doing cookery programs, doesn't it? Anyway, so I put it over the surface and that's it, like that. Some people go to the extent of putting pieces of wire like this to keep the mesh in place. It's a good practice, but I'm a lazy person. I don't do that. For the last 38 years or even 40 years, I have never done that. And the reason why I don't do that is because it is my feeling, and from my experience, the mesh will not run away as long as you put the soil carefully on top of it. If you just put the soil carefully, the soil is fine. You don't have to tie it in. But I could tie it in because I'm now going to put these tying wires. Now let me talk about tying the trees in. Most bonsai, when they're repotted, they're tied in the pot. This is a good practice to do, and I think this practice has probably been started in the late 70s, early 80s. Prior to that, people never used to tie the trees in. They just put the trees in the pot, and once the roots have filled the pot, the tree will never fall out. So tying the tree in is a good practice. Now we tie it with wire. This is aluminum wire, and because there are so many different gauges, what wire do you use? I know some people, they don't use common sense. They go and use a thick wire like this, a 4mm wire to tie the tree. You can use it, but you're wasting wire. There's no need to use such thick wire. I find that for a pot of this size, 2mm or 2.5mm is quite adequate. This, in fact, is 1.5mm. But I find that for a tree of this size, the 2mm wire is fine. You can either use one piece of wire, that means one piece to straddle the trunk, or you can use, for luck, use another piece. Use two. I will use two because I'm just showing you what is a safer method to do. Although I'm working on this round mica pot or the drum mica pot, I'm going to repot the other trees, but I may not go through the process of showing the entire procedure with you because it may take up too much video time. But I'm not going to cheat. I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I'm doing to these trees, to this tree here. So this is how this tree is going to sit, like that. Now the next thing to talk about is the soil. I can use neat akadama. You can look at this soil very carefully. This is akadama. You see how the granules don't break down. They retain the texture and composition throughout its life, maybe as long as 5, even 10 years. I've always said that using akadama neat is not always a good practice, certainly not in the UK. I find that we prefer to mix our soils. So if you come here, you see this is our standard deciduous tree mix. It's got like 30% akadama, some ordinary organic compost, and some grit. But I'm not going to use this for junipers because junipers and pines require slightly more akadama and the Japanese grit or any type of grit to it. Let me show you what I'm going to do. So follow me around. So you're literally seeing what I'm doing. There's nothing staged because this is exactly how I do my trees. Now, as I said, this is a wheelbarrow load of our deciduous tree mix, which we sell. But I'm going to mix some more grit and akadama just to improve the drainage. So this is a very gritty material. When I was in Taiwan, I saw some trees potted almost exclusively in what they call river grit, like this. This is the sort of composition you should get. And here we have this famous Ibaraki Akadama. These bags come all the way from Japan, but I found that it is almost a universally accepted soil. I was surprised that in Taiwan, almost every grower uses Japanese Akadama for potting their best trees. So this is a sort of consistency I would prefer to use with my junipers and pines. You don't have to use it, but you get better results if you use this mix. For years before we could get Akadama, we just used ordinary garden soil, and the trees behaved quite well. But we find that if you use that sort of mix, it performs even better. So let me go back to the potting area and pot up that tree. I like to pass on all the tips to my viewers. You must be wondering why I stand it on this semi-cascade pot. There's a reason for everything. This pot is perfectly level, so when I line the tree up, I know I've got a perfectly horizontal surface. So I can view the tree to see whether it's horizontal, slanting or whatever. So this pot I find very useful when it comes to aligning my trees. Another little tip I'm giving you is this cement tray. People who come from abroad always wonder what this is. These trays you can get from builders merchants for mixing cement. I've been using it for more than 40 years. And the number of people who've copied this idea, I don't claim that it's my idea, but I certainly started it, that this is one of the best receptacles for putting your mix in for doing your bonsai. You can do, there are other trays as well, but this I find very useful because of the scale of our operations. So the first thing I do is to put a layer of soil underneath to cover the base. If I put it carefully and not disturb the mesh, of course the wires have gone through the mesh, so they're not going to get dislodged anyway. I put enough, if you can see what is going in there, and then I put the tree in to see whether the level is right or not. The level is about right. What about a drainage layer? Many people believe in putting a thick layer of drainage material. And by drainage material, we mean the material that is used for providing more drainage. That means there's no soil mixed with it. It's just large grains of probably even Akadama, but we prefer to use different types of material. There is, see, this is a type of pumice that you can use, large grains. You can use that as a drainage course. But I don't see the need for a drainage level or drainage layer, because if your soil drains freely, I believe you don't really need that. So I would forego that. Okay, I've tied the tree very lightly in, and that's the correct sort of lean disposition. I will tighten it a little later, but let me fill more soil first and then see how the tree goes. And at this stage you can either prod it with the end of the root rake, and then for the finer particles you can get your chopsticks. We have all sorts of things, either chopsticks or bamboo sticks. Again, you can use whatever suits you, you know. I have so many different little gadgets here that, you know, you can just improvise. I haven't got to the stage of using the chopstick, but let me fill the rest of the soil, tie the tree in, and then when it's finished, I will show you. Tying the tree in, twisting the tree tight so that it doesn't fall out. As I say, there are 2 pairs of wires here. You got to keep an eye on the wire so that it doesn't bite the surface of the trunk as it grows. Of course, once the roots have filled the pot, then there's no problem. There's no problem at all. You can just leave it there and it should be okay. So I'm now going to fill the rest of the pot with soil. It's quite amazing how much soil it takes, because once it's compressed, you find that you have to keep putting more and more, and there's never enough. And this is the proverbial chopstick. Especially underneath the roots, you'll find that you can't always get all the soil to penetrate there, so the chopstick is certainly a useful thing to have. And all the time make sure that the disposition of the tree, the position of planting, is correct. If you want it like that, then you've got to shove soil underneath to make sure it is inclining or leaning in the right way. This is where my pot stand, being absolutely level, gives me an idea as to what it should look like. See, the more you poke, the more the soil goes in. It's quite amazing how much it takes. It's almost like an endless black hole. And what about putting moss? At this stage, as I'm not really putting it in for exhibition or anything, I don't bother to put moss, but if I want to beautify the tree, then certainly put moss. Of course, the moss will grow once you start watering the tree, but since this is just repotting the tree, so that is the job done. I don't like to put too much soil in case the soil washes away when I repot the tree. So that is how this tree is done. When I've done the other trees, there are 3 more to do, I will show you these. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed this exercise in repotting trees. There you go. So I showed you how I repotted this one, and it's in a mica pot, in a drum pot. I've put these 4 junipers, which are almost all identical, into different pots to show you the effects of how a pot can make the tree look slightly different. These trees are a very nice lean, informal upright like that, like an S shape. So this has been planted at this angle with the gins coming out on this side. So it's only slightly off center. So this tree is planted like that. So every tree I'm going to show you is going to be slightly different. Let's move to the next one. This one is also in a mica pot, but a different mica pot. This is a rectangular one, rectangular pot with very soft edges. I haven't put any surface dressing on it, but I will keep it now in the greenhouse. So this one leans the other way. Again, the lean is very interesting, and it is only just slightly off center. That's the way it is planted. Okay, now I'll show you yet another one to show you how the position of planting is really determined by the slant of the tree and the disposition of the branches. So this one, you can see that the tree is not planted dead in the center, because if it was dead in the center, this branch would overhang that side. So I planted it slightly off to the left, and that seems to work with this. So that pot is different. So I've so far used all these mica pots. I know that a lot of people, say that all mica pots are cheap and nasty, but when you look at it from far, you can't tell the difference between a mica pot and a proper ceramic pot. Now this is a ceramic pot, and it's also a different color, so you can see that it's not the traditional mica color. Now this tree, because it leans so much that you see I had to plant it way to this side. If I put the trunk in the center, it wouldn't look right. It just wouldn't look right. So the angle of planting is extremely important. So this is how this tree has been done. And I dare say, okay, this is the back of the tree, but the back is as nice as the front, but no, the other side is the proper front because it leans more, the apex leans more. So we've transferred these 4 junipers into bonsai pots rather than the Japanese training pots like these. These are what we call Japanese training pots. So it has taken on a new persona. So I show you how we did the repotting of one of them, but I did all the 4 in exactly the same way. So there you are. I hope you've enjoyed this little video. And I must emphasize that because we have these greenhouses, they're going to be kept in the greenhouse till about March. So they won't go out of the greenhouse. So they have protection and they're not going to be frozen. So today we are still in the first week in January. We're not into the hard winter yet. Usually at the end of January and most of February we have snow and hard frost. So far this winter we've had nothing but rain. I believe in the first 3 days of January we had more rain than you would get in 1 month. So it's been so wet. Today fortunately it's not raining and the temperature is still mild. It's about 10 degrees centigrade. Yesterday it was 12 degrees. So we are not in for the hard winter just yet. But there are still a lot of winter jobs that I keep checking on. Many people think that in winter there's nothing to do, but there's a lot to do, there's a lot to plan. So although the evergreens look nice, they look very nice, if we walk around there will be jobs to be done. So if I just walk around casually, this is completely informal video that I'm going to show you. I look at all the trees and see how they're doing, and this little favorite forsythia of mine, I've shown it to you before. This is a sentimental piece that my late wife's friend made, and I can see that some of these forsythia flower buds are already starting to swell. So in a couple of months, or maybe in just a month, it'll begin to flower. The junipers are looking very green. I'm going to talk about the junipers in just a minute, but I will come back to that after I've looked around the nursery. And as I walk around, the larches look bare, the oak trees look bare. And what are these fruit doing? These are the quince fruit. These are the Chinese quince fruit from just one tree. And I'm going to show you what I will do with these because we have a use for them. So let's walk to something else. This is a huge San Jose juniper. And if you remember the videos I showed you about Taiwan and those twisted junipers, and looking back, this is something I did 30 or more years ago. And all these twisted effects are the nearest thing I can get to what the Taiwanese do. And you see the wires still embedded in the bark there. And most of you will know that I used to be criticized for leaving wire on, but this is how these twisted effects are created. So I'm very pleased that I've been vindicated yet again. So this, as I say, is the nearest thing to a Taiwanese juniper. Nowhere near the quality that they can make, but the principle is the same. Twist the things around and leave the wires on and you will get that twisted effect. So that is something that I propose to do this coming year. What about the maples? We see so many maples around, and at this time of the year, I do not touch the maples. You're always tempted to prune the ends and do work on ramification, but I do not start doing them till well into the spring. If you do it, I would say in February, you will find that they will bleed a lot. That means the water and the sap comes out. I'll talk about that when we get into February and late February, early March. But for the time being, just leave your maples alone. Don't touch them, don't prune them. Let me have a look at some of these junipers here. These particular trees have been left here, and they did catch the early winter frost. In November we had a spell of quite cold weather when the temperature went to freezing, and these junipers were left out. And this is the typical browning, or what we call the frost blush of the juniper. Where the frost gets it, it makes it look brown. But inside where the frost doesn't get it, it remains green. So when you see a juniper that is brown in winter, please don't think that it is dying. Another plant which is very susceptible to the frost is the cryptomeria, the Japanese cryptomeria. They turn this very russet brown. And again, people think that the tree is dying. It is simply because the frost has got it. If you open the foliage out where the frost hasn't caught it, it is bright green. But come March and April, this tree will suddenly burst and become green again. All the pines are looking very green indeed. Another little tip that I was passing on to some of the new staff on our nursery is about the wire on some of the larches. This larch had wire on not so long ago, and I told them to take it off because in my experience, having grown larches in the UK for the last 50 or more years, I've found that if you leave wire on the larches, mind you, it's only larches, very few other deciduous trees get affected. The cold that gets on the wire gets transmitted to the branches, and it causes the branches to die, especially the thin branches. So I make sure that the wire is taken off the larches for the winter period. Otherwise you get severe dieback. For some reason it doesn't affect pines. So I'm not worried about the wires on pines. So again, the maples are left well alone. We don't touch them at all. We don't prune them. I'm now going to take you to an area where there are quite a few Chinese junipers, especially the Itiogawa. Now this is another juniper that's slightly brownish. This is a Itiogawa left in the frost. Now if we come here, if you look at these Itiogawas, these are all Itiogawas. You see how bright green they all are. They're all very bright green. Every single one of them. And I seem to recall that in the winter, early winter of January, I think, it was certainly January or maybe even early February, one of our colleagues, Padma Priya, started fertilizing the evergreens with the ordinary Japanese Naruko fertilizer or the rapeseed fertilizer. I didn't say anything to him at the time, and he probably hasn't seen this video. But I let him do it because I like to keep an open mind. I was saying to myself, why did he do that? Perhaps I should tell him off because I don't normally start feeding the trees till early spring, that means March or April. But I let him do it in January, thinking that, oh, the trees will suffer because if they come into early growth, they'll get caught by the frost. But no, I think he has been proved right because these trees have stayed green and have been ever so healthy throughout the year. So I'm going to start feeding again now, which is in early January. I'm not going to do it to all the evergreens, but I'm going to do it certainly to some of the evergreen and see what happens. Sometimes you try to do things which you've been doing for years and years and you don't like to change your ways. But if someone else does something which seems unusual, I think it's an important thing to keep an open mind and try experiments. And this experiment which Padma Priya did, I think was a good one and it's been proved to be right. I know it's only 1 year, we need to try it another year. But if it keeps working year after year, then we've stumbled across something which is good. That means fertilizing very early in the winter, that is January is still winter, the trees will benefit. So all these beautiful green junipers are the result of being fed early. Now you must be asking me why some of those are bronze color and some of these are green. This is because the frost did not get it. We've protected these trees from the frost with this overhead netting, so the netting has stopped the junipers getting frosted, and some of them will be taken into the greenhouse for protection. Okay. I'm now in another tunnel area, and all these maples are without their leaves, but I think they should be okay. If we get very hard frost, I may protect them a little more, take them into the greenhouse. But usually for the winter, the shade netting in the UK is enough to give protection. Ah, what have I got here? Look at this beautiful little Japanese quince. Beautiful. What they call chojubai, you know, you put it with a pine and a bamboo and make a beautiful little planting. There are some other ones, but these don't seem to have had flower. Now let's walk a little further on. I'm carrying this empty pot and a pair of secateurs because I'm going to collect some seed. Now these are pyracantha. You look at all these seeds here. The birds are very fond of eating these fruit, so they keep picking the fruit, but I don't like to waste anything. I don't like to waste anything. All these seeds will become plants. So I'm going to collect all the rest of these seeds, as many as I can. It's really just to show you what we do. So we are going to sow some of these seeds and follow the progress of this tree. This is where the birds have taken all the fruit. I let the birds take some because I like to feed the birds as well. So I don't collect all the seeds. I take some of the seeds and let the birds eat some. The same with this. This is the Japanese hawthorn. And they have these beautiful large fruit, and they'll only drop and get wasted. So at this time of the year, before they fall or get pinched by the birds, I will collect some seed and I will sow them. I will sow them. So this is what I do with these fruit. And there are different types. You see that type of Japanese hawthorn has got the big fruit, and this Japanese hawthorn, I don't know what's the difference. They've got slightly different fruit. So they're all different plants. So it's worth seeing how they perform. They're clearly different. They're clearly different. Once you're into plants and into bonsai, it's great fun sowing from seed. Now this is the European hawthorn or oxycanthus, so that Japanese one must be similar to the European one. So there are a lot of fruit in this too. So lots of fruit in there. And these rock plantings, we've had such a hard summer last year that they got frazzled in the heat. So I've got to carefully nurture them and bring them back into good condition. So if the frost gets harder, it's going to go into the greenhouse for protection, because they did suffer a lot last year in the heat. So let's move on and see what else there is to do. The yews I will probably leave outside because the frost is not too hard. The other thing I wanted to point out is that I said I don't prune anything. So all these long shoots, you see, this is the Chinese quince, is already coming into leaf. Such an early plant. Look at it, all coming into leaf. And this has not been protected in the greenhouse. One is tempted to prune the shoots, but I'll be a bit reserved and cautious and don't prune it just yet. The same goes for our young nursery plants. If I can just take you to an area where we have a lot of young nursery plants. These of course all are starter plants. We continue to sell and make bonsai from them. See, These are larches. Larches, I think, are quite hardy trees, but if you can resist it, don't prune them. The same goes for the ginkgo. See, these are ginkgos that have shed their leaves. You see, these shoots have all been produced in the last year, and one really should cut them back to about here or even further down. But I prefer to wait till end of February, early March, when the worst of the winter is over, because if you make cuts now, the frost can get into the twigs and cause dieback further back. So this is just a precautionary measure. Don't be in a rush to do that. Again, looking at some of these forsythia, they're already bursting. The buds are beginning to swell. And very soon they should be blooming. Having said that about not pruning, there are certain plants which are what we call tough as old boots, and the hedging honeysuckle, which we did a workshop on, they are very, very hard. So these can stand hard pruning any day. So I'm not worried about that. So you just got to use your common sense and discretion. But generally plants which appear to be tender, don't prune back. So I'll now go and show you how we sow some of our seeds, and we'll go into the back greenhouse. So let's begin by sowing some seeds, and we will do it with the quince first. So I have so many fruit just from a few trees. So although it's January, I could have done it back in November, but as long as you do it before March. If you leave it too late, then it may have to wait another year, because whatever you do may not produce germination. So you look at it, the fruit. And if I was clean enough, I can probably boil this pulp and get a lovely dessert from it. So that is the seed we're going to take out. The fruit is not very sweet. It's a bit sharp, I think. It's just pulpy. So this is how you get the seeds out. Sometimes the seeds are not viable. Let's see the small one, what happens to them. This one is very hard, it's rock hard. I've got to be careful that I don't cut the seeds, because if you cut the seeds, then you've ruined it. I think I might even need to use a cleaver to open it out. Oh, so I've cut some seeds. See, the color of the seed is different for this one. So those are the seeds, like so. So those are the seeds you got out. Now, with some of these other fruit, this is just the quince. These crab apples, they eventually rot. So you can either cut the fruit open to get the seeds out. You see, look at the seeds. So nice and firm seeds. So this fruit probably only got like 5 or 6 seeds. So that's the seed you want to get out. But I'll show you, we do different things with different seeds. So let's prepare the compost. You must be wondering why I have this one with just sand in it. There are all sorts of different theories. Look at that, that's a maple seed in there, fallen on the thing, and it's already beginning to swell and germinate. So sand is a very good medium to use. But if you wanted to, you could sow it in pure sand. Because although it may not have any nutrients, once it germinates, you then prick them out and you can separate the seedlings. So these quince seeds, I will just put in here. You can spread it around. Doesn't matter if they stick together because you will always be able to separate the seedlings once they grow. And then you can cover it with a very thin film of sand again. Now I showed the use of sand because many people think that you've got to use special seed sowing compost. You don't have to. Let me show you how we do. Now these are seedling. This is quince.
Last year's quince.
Last year's quince.
In sand.
Last year's quince from these fruit.
In sand.
And this was planted, Josh reminds me, in pure sand. Look at the sand. And these all germinated like that. Look, the leaves are fallen because of deciduous tree. And you see a little bit of red. Quince leaves are red like this. So this is 1 year seedlings. Now this is cotoneaster seedlings. And look at it, this is only 1 year, sown last winter, and already they are quite viable plants. If I pull one out, and if you wanted to make a marmee tree, I dare say you could even make a marmee tree. Look at how vigorous the roots are. Certain trees are more vigorous than others, and cotoneaster is certainly one of them. The roots are so vigorous that they've all got entangled with the other plants. Look at that, 1 year seedling. And I've got to cut the root off, it's so vigorous. Look at that. Such a lovely plant. So there you are, you could wire it and get a very nice bonsai from that with a 1 year seedling. So these are things that I sowed last year. And you see the roots are coming out from underneath the tray. I'm going to show you how to mix compost if you want to be fastidious. Let's come here. Now there's all sorts of commercial compost, what they call garden compost, available in the market. This is something that you can buy from supermarkets or garden centers. And now that peat is no longer used, this is probably composted leaves and chipped bark. So you can either sow the seed directly into this, or if you wanted to, you can mix it with sand. I think if you mix it with sand, it is slightly better because you get better drainage. And if you can afford it, you can use the proper bonsai compost. This is our standard deciduous mix, where it is organic material, 30% organic, 30% akadama, and 30% of the Japanese volcanic grit. So you can use bonsai compost. So you can use all sorts of different compost for sowing the seed. The important thing is, after you've sown the seed, put it outside for the frost to get at it. So the frost acts as a stimulator, and it is called breaking the dormancy. So the seeds, for those of you who know a little bit of botany, the seeds go into hibernation, and while they're hibernated, they are sleeping and you need to wake them up. So these are those big hawthorn. I can open it up and you can see this. Each of these has just one big seed in it, like that. So I can sow that. This one again, for some reason, it's just got one seed in it. In fact, it's so soft I can just get the seed out. Look at it. Just one seed. So this is very pulpy, so it's just one seed. Again, just one seed. Okay, but that is not the only way to do it. If you wish, you can simply put the fruit into the tray, because what will happen is that the flesh will rot and the seeds will germinate through it. I've got a bucket here, and these are crab apples that we just leave in the containers here like this to rot away. And when they rot, rather than cut open each individual fruit, we sow it in our seed beds, and this is how we get our crab apple plants. Simple as that. So there are so many different ways of doing it. Please remember that there is no one way which is perfect, and no one has the monopoly of wisdom. If you've done it a particular way and are successful, please tell me. I've got something to learn from you. There are so many different ways of sowing seed. It is just a nature's process of reproduction. So seed sowing, although you may think it is a long process, it is quite a rewarding process, and you can get results very quickly. Like most of our maples are grown from seed. Junipers we prefer to grow from cuttings, but junipers can also grow from seed. So enjoy your winter sowing seeds. So there's always something to do in the winter. So I hope you've enjoyed this video.